Hi, everybody. Welcome to this edition of Columbia Omni Studios interview series, where we interview some of the industry experts in our field. And today we're going to talk to Julian Mussi, who is the Vice President of Business Development at DeSL. I've known Julian for a number of years and have a high regard for him and a high regard for his knowledge, especially about color. And I think that's the thing that he likes the best. So, hi, Julian.
Hey, Mitch.
One thing that I've asked a few of the other interviewees, and I think that it's very telling, is to talk about your career path, to talk about how you started. I know that you didn't start in the textile business, but you're stuck in it now. So just curious, and I think the audience will get a lot out of hearing about your career path.
Yeah, sure. It's funny, one of those. I feel like I'm like a lot of people in this industry, where it's like I found myself in color, rather than kind of intending to be here. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, going back into like high school, I was always kind of torn between like, this love of techie things and a little bit more artsy stuff, photography and film, and especially in the early 90s, the tech was not as cool as it is now. So I think that when I went to college, I kind of rebelled against that and went to school for I think it was film and sociology. So I was, gearing up for the real lucrative career path. And then after school, started working as a photographer, did a little commercial photography, and that kind of got me into the the color world a little bit, because it was kind of transitioning from analog to digital, so we were doing a lot of film scanning, and so the color workflow part of that was really important. And I remember it just being, really overwhelming initially, trying to do retouching on a screen, and then, you get your print exactly the way you want it, and you click print, and, the results were terrible sometimes, and so that kind of got me into this whole color management, world. And, it was still pretty early days. So I remember ordering a monitor calibration puck, and waiting for that to arrive, and then getting that all set up, and my prints still weren't looking good, and couldn't figure out why that was a thing. So anyway, finally got into that, started getting a hand on what digital color workflow really meant, and all the various parts of that, and started doing fine art printmaking. And so we were really pushing the boundaries of trying to get the yeah, a nice word for it. I remember the first time someone came over and they're like, I want to show you this digital print I just made, and they were so excited. They pulled it out and they put it down in front of me, and they're like, can you believe this is digital? And I looked at it, and it was this black and white. It had this ugly green cast, and I was like, yeah, I can believe that's digital. It looks terrible, But, eventually, the quality really improved, and the prints that we were getting were really, really excellent. So anyway, that was kind of my world for a while, was, working with artists, doing retouching, and, and it was, a small business, and I had a young family. And so eventually I took a job at SpectraFlow as a consultant. And, at the time we were doing, it was a pretty fun time, actually, in retrospect, because we were, in the course of a couple of weeks, we were working for newspapers, back when there were newspapers. We had Pixar as a client, so movie studios, independent photographers. We started working with some apparel customers. So, each week was like, really all exposure to all these different color workflows, and so that was kind of eye-opening too, in the sense that, all these guys were using color, they were reliant on it, but the terminology, the requirements, the specifications, the standards were all different all over the place. So that was kind of was kind of fun times. And then
And
from
that
there, I
was
got
that mostly selling printers, Julian?
yeah, I mean, we sold printers, but you know, the majority of the work was really doing, you know, the integration. So it was really the whole, you know, color workflow. Like our biggest client at the time was Abercrombie, and they had, I think there was over 100 large format inkjet printers at one time running there. And we, you know, the challenge that they had was, you know, they wanted all their CAD design files to be color accurate when they printed them out. And oh, by the way, all the 100 printers needed to be identical so that they could send a design to any printer, and it would be the same across all the different departments. So, you know, that really got us thinking about, you know, first off, it kind of exposed all the silos that we were dealing with within an organization. You know, that the marketing department and the CAD department, you know, they were almost two separate organizations. You know, they didn't have any overlap, even though a lot of what they were doing was the same. You know, e-commerce is the same thing. So yeah, it was, you know, it was interesting trying to bring order and communication to, you know, across those organizations. But yeah, and then, you know, I got into kind of recalled some of the software development that I had done, you know, just as kind of for fun, and started kind of hacking out some solutions for some of the clients that we were working with. Really, I mean, they were just kind of tools as a consultant. You know, that was the original idea. And then of course that turned into, you know, an actual product down the road. So that's kind of how I ended up
So that
here.
was the,
Yeah.
that was the genesis of Color Insight?
Yeah, yeah, it was not much more than a spreadsheet initially for just doing. Actually, I think the initial client was I think it was like Sacramento Bee, you know, a newspaper, and they were looking for you know, a quick way to calculate corrections for their spot colors. And of course, you know, there were a lot of software tools out there, but you know, we wanted something that we could kind of tweak and use. And yeah, then we showed it. I don't even know how it came up, but we showed the tool, which was, you know, again, more like a spreadsheet, to someone at Old Navy, and they're like, "Oh, we could use this to, you know, adjust the color on all of our CAD prints, which we want to be, you know, accurate to the physical standards," and that kind of took Color Insight into kind of the direction that it is.
So when you say the CAD department, what are they doing actually? Are they printing a print for a print fabric and making the repeats and strike off? What is that exactly?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question, because it, you know, everyone uses or you know, used to rely on CADs even more. You know, it spanned the gamut from, no pun intended, from, you know, clients that would actually print out, you know, a CAD of a design, a shirt or something, and they would fill it with, you know, a couple different colorways, and they would present that to their buyers, who would then, you know, make color selection based upon that presentation. And then sometimes those CADs would actually find their way out to the factory to serve as a reference to for the printers as well too.
Right.
So the importance of, you know, the color accuracy of those really mattered. The print almost became kind of a quasi standard in a sense. But yeah, just being able to trust the print, you know, and then we'd have people who they would spend a lot of time doing the color correction on those CADs, and then they'd put them out on the wall for design review. And, you know, in a lot of cases, the color still wasn't good enough. So then they would take a little swatch and they would, you know, pin it to the CAD. And, you know, so there was all these layers upon layers of work that were being created to try and you know, compensate for, you know, the color not being accurate on the prints or the screens, right? Because I mean, at some point it's like, what color is this thing that we're making?
Right. And so then you started to work for DSL.
Yeah. So about 4 years ago, I joined DSL, and you know, I was doing a little kind of soul searching, trying to figure out, you know, what the direction for the Color Insight product was, and you know, more and more I saw it as, you know, it'd be more useful if it could kind of help span the communication gap between you know, design and production, between different departments within an organization. And you know, the software product that's kind of at the crossroads of all those different requirements and concerns is our PLM systems. And so DSL, we're a PLM company kind of first and foremost. And so, yeah, so it was kind of a great fit. And, you know, over the last few years, we've really worked to make color kind of a foundational component of the PLM product offer. So, you know, in a lot of PLM systems, you know, color really isn't much more than just a field, you know, in a record
Right.
somewhere that says, you know, it's got a color name, and maybe there's some RGB values, but, you know, no color space attached to it. So it almost gives you an opportunity to do more harm than good. And so what we've really done is to link up, you know, full color description, and you know, have that information carried when you're communicating, you know, actually throughout the whole design, production, approval process, throughout the whole supply chain. So that's what's, you know, taking up most of my time most days.
Yeah, I'm sure. So how has like color management software, how has it progressed over the last 4 years or so? Like what's changing in it? What's making it better?
In our software, or just kind of in industry in general, you think?
Both, yeah.
Well, so, you know, initially Color Insight was, you know, was really kind of a desktop application. And so, you know, thinking kind of globally has been a challenge in some ways. You know, you kind of, if you design software in a vacuum, you know, it's a little simpler as opposed to thinking about the actual requirements. You know, one of the things that's been most challenging is not the functionality, it's adapting the functionality for the end user. You know, so, I mean, there's a lot of good tools out there that have, you know, all the bells and whistles and can do, you know, very elaborate, you know, analysis of color information. But, you know, realistically, it's too difficult for a lot of people to use. So, you know, one thing that PLM can allow you to do is you have within the system a lot of metadata, a lot of information that you can then use to kind of set the system up so that the end user really isn't going in and having to choose, you know, all of the options to perform a task. Like, they're just exposed to kind of the end requirement, which is, you know, can you please measure a batch, submit that information back to us, and then, you know, we'll handle all of the connecting it to the development request, and, you know, link it up to the fabric record and all of that information. You know, and I think that in general, that's been something that, you know, the industry really needs to focus on. Is, you know, we've had the fundamental technology for a long time. You know, what we really need to do is make it a little bit more friendly, you know, without compromising it either. And that's a challenge. And then there's other things too, like, you know, what if you're working with someone who doesn't have good internet connection, or they go offline from time to time? So you have to think about that. So, you know, you might have to have and this is what we ended up doing, a hybrid solution where you have, you know, web components, but you also have desktop components, so you can interface with the spectrophotometers. And so, you know, it's really kind of required us, you know, there's not been a lot of new development in terms of, like, you know, algorithms and things like that. It's mostly focused on how can we deliver a better experience, you know, for the end user. You know, just as a quick example, like, you know, if you go into Photoshop and you want to make a print, you know, there's, I think, literally about a dozen things that you need to check. You know, the paper setting, you know, rendering intent, black point compensation, you know, there's this whole list of things, and even someone who does it every day, you skip one or you miss one, and you get different output between two different prints, and that's why the RIP software, that's why that's the advantage that something like that provides, is it takes away all those decisions from the end user. They can just submit a file and you get consistent results. So I think that that's been something that the industry kind of needs to move more towards, and certainly been something that we've been trying to focus on.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I'm starting to hear a lot of the same kind of ideas come through these interviews. And Keith Hoover said the other day that he's like, these are not new ideas, guys. Basically, like, this has been around. And he's like, I'm shocked that not more people are doing it or getting it or doing it right. And of course, there are a lot of people that are. Which I think brings me to my next question, is that there's a lot of small and medium-sized companies, we were talking about a little bit before we started, that really don't understand color management all that well. And that there's some digital pieces that would help, right? You're not going to throw it, the whole PLM system at once, but what can help small and medium-sized companies start getting more efficient, start using digital in tandem with the physical, and start working a color flow a little bit more effectively and hopefully accurately?
It's a good question. I think in some ways some of the challenges faced by the small companies are not that different than some of the big ones that have yet to really
it's just scale.
Implement digitally across their whole workflow. My feeling is that, and Keith and I talk about this one a lot too, but it's kind of frustrating to see the industry kind of stuck at 80% on a lot of these things. When you could have this start to finish digital workflow that would really yield a lot of interesting benefits. But I also feel like there's an advantage to just starting somewhere, to just getting a foot in the door, and you can pick a part of the process and focus on that. It could be getting your monitors calibrated and getting your design tools, set up so that color is consistent across, 2D, 3D packages, right? That yields a lot of benefits. More and more, I think people are moving away from printing out work for review, but it's still a pretty effective means of communicating color. So maybe it makes sense to invest in that too, as even if you kind of consider it a stopgap or kind of a temporary method. Some investment in spectrophotometers is usually a good call. The benchtop devices are going to be the right call for, serious color specification and measurement. But, we've done a lot with even like the i1s, the, handheld device you get for $1,000.
Yeah.
And a lot of it too, you can break down into, do I need to communicate the specification of this color, or am I trying to approve, consistency, right? Like there's an accuracy versus consistency issue too. And if we're trying to do, the standard that I approved in one location, and I want to ensure that in my factory or someone else is, producing the same color, if we're both using the same devices, and even if they're, cheaper ones, that's an option too. Even some of these little handheld deals from Data Color, in terms of measuring consistency, they're great. You can do a lot with those. So I think
I wonder about those, and the same thing with other companies, colorimeters or spectrocolorimeters.
Yeah.
You're matching to a particular standard, whether it's a paint color or a Pantone color or whatever, and you could have two colors that are really pretty far apart that say they match the same color.
You could.
So I wonder if those are really good for that kind of thing.
Well, there's a big asterisk next to that, right? Like they
It's
work
approval
well.
with disaster.
Well, you know, if I have a fabric sample in front of me and I measure that with, I mean, you know, whatever, any device, as long as it's repeatable, right? If I'm doing QC on the same fabric, right? You know, then those devices, as long as they're traceable to one another, you know, as long as they're repeatable, then they should tell me, you know, is that sample that's produced, is it pretty close to the fabric that I approved? But, you know, one of the things that, and this is one of my pet peeves, is I don't know how many times I see a standard and it's on, you know, it's a dyed cotton, and they're using it to approve, you know, a nylon or a poly or home goods, a plastic. You know, you have paper standards that are being used for home goods, you know, and the sheen and the texture are all different. And you know, you can't. I mean, you can discount that, but not when doing, you know, if not if you're trying to trace it back to, you know, a visual color approval, and especially for those things, that's usually pretty important.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's one of those right tools for the job kind of things. And, you know, I think this is also too why it's so hard for smaller and medium-sized businesses to know where to start, because like you have to unpack all these requirements. And I think in a lot of cases it's just overwhelming. Like they don't know where to start. But you know, again, I think if you know, especially working with, you know, some sort of consultant that can kind of help you figure out, you know, what the, you know, how to maximize the benefits, you know, minimize the investment, and then pick a place to start, you know, as well as kind of having that holistic view too of, you know, here's the workflow that we want to create at the end of the day, but okay, let's get this part in place first. I think that's the ideal way to work, you know, if you can.
Yeah. Well, Andrew Fraser, who was here a month or so ago, said that he would start with a color management software, which I think really makes sense, because you could read, you know, what the vendors' QTX files, the spectral data from them, and make comparisons to a standard without doing the readings yourself. You know,
Yeah.
so but it's interesting, and I was going to ask you about the handhelds. I think more and more people will start using them for regular use. You know, 'cause they are pretty accurate, and they're, you know, a whole lot less expensive.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just the advantage too, being able to pick it up and move it throughout, you know, different locations, actually bring it out onto the factory floor. You know, and some of the spherical handhelds too are a real interesting compromise as well too, because, you know, they're very accurate. They're not, you know, they're not as cheap as an I1, but I think they're a nice middle ground too. And yeah, the flexibility to, you know, take measurements offline too, and then bring them back in and plug them into desktop is nice. So,
Yeah.
you know, yeah.
You would have to, I mean, I think you'd have to use a sphere. I'm not a spectro expert, but I think you'd have to, because that's what data you're comparing it to. So what I hear about PLMs, and you could fit it into a thimble, but I always notice how long those implementations take. And has that changed over the years? Because I always see these people using, you know, working on it for long periods of time. And are you doing anything to help that?
Yeah, it's, I mean, you're implementing PLM, it's like saying, you know, how long does it take to build a house? You know, it depends on if you're building a garden shed or a, you know, a mansion. You know, the reason the PLM can take so long is, in a lot of cases, I don't think it's actually the implementation of the software. You know, that's usually a pretty trivial part. It's mapping all of the business processes that a company has into the software. And a lot of times, you know, there's this kind of, you know, you're kind of reflecting the process back to them. And that's usually the time when they go, huh, okay, you know,
why?
Are we doing this the right way? Do we want to actually stick to that? And so there's a lot of conversation around that process. And then, you know, that's that's typically one of the reasons that PLM is kind of seen as this, very involved process, because it certainly can.
Yeah.
Again, in kind of talking about not compartmentalizing, but taking a PLM or a color implementation into its constituent components, you can also just pick an area and like, okay, we're gonna focus on just like the color implementation, and that can go pretty quickly. You were mentioning starting with the software. One of the kind of design paradigms, that we have is we're not actually trying, like the Color Insight software is not really designed to replace anything. We see it as kind of the single source of truth, kind of a system of record for color specification. And that's kind of the idea behind PLM too, is that it's the central system to manage all these other parts. But even with the focus just on color, once you have that digital library, once you have organized, digitized your standards, then you have the opportunity to start building up metadata about them. So that can be, third-party information about the achievability of the color, or color by substrate. You can have your dye formulations in there. But you can also have other information too. You can have sales data, sell-through rates. You can have challenges of achievability by different regions. You can have production information. We can do this with these dye stuffs, but we have trouble doing this with pigment prints, but sublimation's okay. And now you can expose that information to like designers, for example, right? And so you're giving them feedback so that they can make more intelligent design decisions, upstream as well too, rather than dealing with production problems because the specification of the color was all wrong for the given substrate. Being able to preview how is this print going to execute, in a couple different, using a couple different print techniques, and just seeing, okay, there might be a problem with this. Maybe we should select something different. And so, the idea is that all that information kind of feeds back into your central system. You can start tying in other areas. You can link it up to your design tools so that, your palettes are communicated effectively. You can start tying it in to, e-commerce, if you're doing a catalog, so that all that color information is now connected, that, the design, the production, the approval, it's all in one system, and the decision-making process, the insights, it's all going to the same place. So you're breaking down those silos that kind of tend to pop up, in a lot of organizations.
Yeah. I think that achievability on different substrates is getting better. I hear so many people talking about it. Maybe it's just one of those code words that just gets thrown around, but I know a lot of companies that are working on it, and it's not that hard. You have a, it could be done. So so when you're talking about PLMs, it makes me wonder about the small and medium-sized companies. Are they able to get into the PLM game and have it work for them without spending, huge amounts of money, which I'm sure won't be done after, the next few months. So how does it benefit a small or medium-sized company?
Yeah, I mean, we actually before the pandemic hit, one of the pushes last year was to really push forward with a product that was targeted towards SMBs. And again, the main focus was to try and kind of present, to make that deployment process easier by providing kind of a framework so that there are certain assumptions built into the system. We're kind of giving them a configuration that was set up for best practices, and so that the deployment would be a lot easier. And the color product was also kind of went hand in glove with that as well too. So yeah, I mean, PLM doesn't really have to cost a lot. It's also kind of a factor of how much you want to do with it, how many users you want to onboard. But yeah, we've worked with, a few companies that have, you consider smaller, I guess. And one of the big benefits for them too is being able to, connect their production concerns a little tighter too. For especially companies that own their own factories or means of production, or they have kind of a tight relationship with them, being able to implement color approval. And one of the things we've done too is we've also expanded. So our color approval system actually also has a kind of a print optimization in it as well too. So as an example, we've worked on some projects with sublimation, and this optimization tool, we used to use it for the CAD team so that they could have their CAD colors printed out more accurately. And we found that it was a great fit for people doing digital printing, where they could actually, in pretty much near real time, make a sublimation print, measure the fabric, compare it against the standard, and then develop a correction to their spot color tables. And we had people that were taking, their factories were taking, weeks to approve, a seasonal palette of colors that were sent from the brand. And then, we put the optimization thing in place, and, it sounds like hyperbole, but they were knocking it out in, a day, just by giving them that feedback loop, so that it wasn't just, okay, here's the specification, match it. Okay, yeah, you sent me this color. No, it's a fail. It gave them the opportunity to kind of iterate on their color matching, so that the production people could actually see the results, and so that then when they sent something back for approval, it was already pre-vetted. So I think that's something else too that I think the industry could kind of use is there's a little bit of this kind of carrot and stick mentality, and it's a little bit more stick, in the relationship between some of the brands and the vendors. Here's the tolerance that you have to hit, approved or rejected. But I think that, helping them to improve the process, giving them the tools so that really the only things they're sending you are, approvals, is something that we kind of need to move towards as well too.
Yeah. And you're talking about sublimation printing on fabric, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's during this pandemic, everybody's working from home, and we're trying to find new ways and new ways to communicate and whatnot. Do you see any anything good coming out of this, where we're learning any efficiencies about, hey, you know what, we did this during the pandemic, and it's a best practice now. I mean, it's not good, but the last time we had the financial crisis, a lot less people went back to the places they started from, because they got by with a lot less people. Do you see any of that happening now, or what do you see?
Yeah, it's a real tough one. Honestly, color management at a individual level is a real challenge. I think it's worth noting too that this color stuff is really hard. Like, color is really complicated. Like,
wait, we just talked about how easy it is.
Well, we're trying to come up. Well, we're trying to come up with all these tools to make it a little simpler, but fundamentally, it's really challenging, right? Because you have all these different components. You have you're trying to model what's happening in here, because ultimately it's a psychophysical phenomenon. That's what color is, so we have to have the physics of light, which is not an easy thing to explain. You have all the material challenges. Yeah, you take psychology into it, which is like a huge part of it. it's not like measuring something where it's like, you can hand someone a ruler. It's like, yeah, how long is that? They're like 2 inches. Cool. With color, you're like, well, here's the lab value. Okay, well, what illuminant is it relative to? Oh, D65. Okay, great. Oh, what about my observer content? And by that point, you've already lost, 99% of your audience. Trying to calibrate monitors, yeah, you can send someone a puck and they can calibrate the monitor, and we have tools for that. But the biggest challenge, and one we don't talk about, is the environment that they're viewing the screen in, right? Like, you have this nice Apple monitor, and now they change brightness to compensate for the surround area, which is nice if you're a designer, but in terms of color accuracy, it can be a challenge. So it's really difficult. It makes some things really, really difficult. You're probably not going to send everyone home with a light booth. What we can do is,
you'd be surprised how many people are taking one now and sending it home.
Yeah.
Well, and God bless
maybe
them.
that's part of it. At the end of the day, if we can rely more on the numbers, that is probably, one of the things that's going to come out of remote work, is maybe we'll put a little bit more attention into, everyone's design software, it's going to be, the color settings have to be centrally managed, so that when we exchange files, we're all in the same color space. That becomes, more important. We're all pulling from the same palette source, right? Rather than having, sharing palettes and, emailing them back and forth. Like, we really need a central source to pull from. So we're using the same RGB values or spot color definitions. When we specify an approved color, we're going to have to look at the numbers. We're going to have to look at what the devices say. If it says that there's a delta E of 0.8 and that's your tolerance, you're going to have to rely on that rather than say, send me the sample. So, that may be what happens, but I don't know. I'm a little skeptical too, just because, people are the weakest link in all this too. It's like, you can have all these tools, but if you don't use them effectively, the whole thing breaks down. And a big part of that is training and education. And I think that's something that probably needs, a little bit more investment too. Probably needs to start in the schools too, like in the design colleges. Like, there should be, a whole course on, practical color science, not like the color theory where it's like, don't mix, orange and green or something like that, but more like, here's how your environment affects things, here's how here's why you need to use a light booth. And then when people are coming out of college, like, they already have those best practices instilled in them. And it's not, it's not an uphill battle to try and kind of educate that once they're in the industry.
Yeah. Tough though. I mean, there's less and less textile schools. Yeah. My school, Philadelphia Textile, is now Jefferson University. So that'll give you an indication of how much emphasis they're putting on now. Do you think that there's things that the color standard providers can do better, or to make color a little easier to match, or is there anything that you think they could do better?
Well, so one thing that I, this is just my opinion, but with a standards provider, the standard, the whole point of having a standard is that it should be accessible, right? Like, if I have a color standard, that spectral curve really should be that's your standard, not the physical, right? Because
that's right.
The physical is an example of the execution on a substrate to that curve. That's right. So that digital component is really key. And if you can't effectively utilize that digital standard, then you're kind of defeating the whole point of it. And, some providers are better than others in making it relatively easy to acquire those digital standards. But, to me, that's a big part of it. You know, if you're specifying,
Yeah.
you know, color X, you know, it should be unambiguous what the digital definition of that color is. You know, if you have to jump through a bunch of hoops, then people find the easiest path. You know, then they find the, you know, I mean, I remember going on site once and we pulled out their standards, and you know, the designers had manually corrected one of their kind of whites. I think it was, you know, some sort of white color, but it kept printing out tan, and we couldn't really figure out what was going on with that. And then we pulled the standard, and the standard that they were using as a visual reference was literally 10 years old. And it had been handled so much. And originally it was optically brightened. And so this white became very much an off-white from years of, you know, oils and the sun bleaching all the OBAs out, you know.
Sure.
But that piece of 10-year-old piece of fabric was, you know, important in its visual reference, you know. Whereas if you kind of, you say, no, look, this curve on the screen, that's our color. I mean, that's certainly a more effective way to do it, but, you know, then you also have to contend with people saying that doesn't, you know, I want something in my hands I can touch and feel, and there's that whole tactile kind of emotional component to it. So it's tough, you know, it's tough. But yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, if you're saying, okay, we have a digital workflow and digital color standards, like, you know, everyone needs to be able to work from that same unambiguous definition of what the color is.
Yeah, and I think I think the standards providers have heard that for so many years. They're definitely advancing on it. I see some advances. So hopefully that'll happen. Do you think that there'll be the same type of emphasis on color quality after the pandemic? If there is an after, I don't know. You know, will people still care so much about it, or will the environment be so changed that everything will look different?
It's an interesting question. I mean, my thinking is that we can't afford to let, you know, the level of quality slip. You know, first off, because it's a slippery slope, right? Once you start getting away from those tight tolerance, I mean, if someone approves at a 0.8, by the time it makes it on the shelf, it's never really a 0.8, you know? So if you're a little bit more lenient upstream, by the time you get downstream, it's going to be all over the place. You know, I remember sitting in on a talk, I think it was someone at Levi's, and they were talking about, like, there were Dockers and the khakis, you know, and how, you know, in that particular color family too, right? Like, very subtle shifts are really noticeable, especially when you start stacking product up on the shelves. So I don't know. I think that we need to hold fast on, you know, the quality standards that we've, you know, kind of built the industry to. But yeah, I mean, it might be a little bit of a challenge. We're going to have to figure out other ways to maintain that across, you know, more of a remote working environment. And I think some things are going to go back to normal, but I mean, I think, you know, rather than having maybe a color team in the middle of a whole design department, maybe the color team is, you know, more centralized in one location, and you know, our design teams and often a different location. I don't know, maybe we see the work looking a little bit more like that. But, you know, I mean, these, you know, we have these people, these job functions for a reason. One thing though, you know, just anecdotally, I sound like a Luddite, but I bought my first online purchase during the pandemic of clothing, and immediately returned it because the color was, first one. Yeah. I mean, I bought things on Amazon, but not clothing. I'm old school. I like to go look at it. But yeah, I mean, the color was wrong. The fit was terrible, and, you know, finally I got one that worked. But yeah, I mean, that's a big thing too, right? Is the focus on you know, e-commerce and those little color chips at the bottom of the product image. You know, I think that's an area too that could use a lot of improvement. And some companies are doing a really good job of it, and others are doing a terrible job. I actually encountered, and I won't name the company, but online the color square representation of a product was you could tell that someone had used like Microsoft Paint and just filled it in like as like the default like magenta color, because you know there was like some neon magenta. Like you could see it was like filled in with paint. You know, that was like their online representation of that product color. So you know, that's another thing too, that where you could use, you know, PLM or some sort of color lifecycle management to say, okay, we're going to actually pull the e-commerce, you know, color from, you know, we're going to derive it from the standard. And so rather than having a photographer recolor, you know, based upon the garment sitting next to them, you know, you can automatically apply color to, you know, and now more and more it's a 3D rendering too, right? So, you know, I think things like that, I think we can probably see more of an investment in, you know, kind of streamlining the online representation of color, digital color representation as well. And, you know, I don't know what the percentage is, probably like 80% of online purchases are done over the phone too. So, you know, like Apple's actually done a pretty good job of investing in, you know, the screen calibration, and, you know, the iPhone screen accuracy is pretty decent, you know, compared to where we were, you know, 10 years ago in kind of the Wild West of, you know, flip phones and Android phones. So, you know, that's had a big impact, and, you know, it's kind of done behind the scenes, which is nice too.
Yeah, it's always surprised me, or at least up until a few years ago, how little data was being collected about returns, and specifically color returns, which is what I was really interested in.
Yeah.
You know, like somebody sends something back to LL Bean, I'm making up a name. You know, they would send it back with a sheet of paper, and they could either check one of those boxes or not, you know. And so that's not really captured. So I think it's just kind of approximated how much money is really wasted. So much money now on returns and you know, shipping things back and da 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 da. So I think that is important and will continue to be. So those are the questions I have. Is there anything else you want to talk about?
I could talk about color for a long time, Mitch.
I can't say the same thing. Tell us something that everybody would be surprised to know about you.
About me? I don't know.
Besides that you were a psychology major.
There's a python in my kitchen.
There's a what? A python?
Yeah.
Ah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a pet snake. Her name's Audrey.
All right.
Yeah, I don't know. We have kind of a weird collection of animals, I guess. Before that, I had a.
We'll keep the small ones away from the python.
Yeah. Well, actually, my son informed me the other day that he wants a meerkat now. He watched a nature documentary and has decided that that's our next pet. So we're trying to counter offer with maybe a cat or something like that. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, every kid should have a meerkat.
Yeah, I mean they're pretty
the way
cool.
It is.
I mean, if it didn't violate probably some health ordinance, I'd try to make it happen.
Okay, Julian, thank you so much. It was really interesting and great to talk to you. I really appreciate it. Thanks for your time so much. Let me just check and see if there was any questions on Facebook. I don't see any, but if some turn up, I'll send them to you so you could answer them.
Sounds good.
All right. So everybody, if there's people out there, thanks for your time. We appreciate it. Next week we have an interesting guest also. His name is Bruce Wright from X-Wright, and he's going to talk about TAC, which is total appearance capture, which is really interesting. People looking at 3D imagery and being able to not just look at a color accurately, but what is the appearance of that fabric, of that substrate, on that image with realistic imagery. So that'll be interesting. And thanks again for your time. It's Columbia Omni Studio. And thank you, everybody. Thank you, Julian.
My pleasure.